Welcome to the show. I'm Sean Ofeldt, your host and CEO of Transition Overwatch. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Shane Sloan, who is the Fractional COO at Work Heartily. And we'll get into what that means here shortly, and a veteran. So welcome to the show, Shane. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. I really appreciate it.
Well, Shane, I always like to start with, when we have veterans on, like, what was your journey? What does your journey look like from your service to where you're at now? So if you can dig in there and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So, dating myself a bit, I graduated high school in 1998, and I joined the military in January of '99. And I left service, I think, end of February 2003 is my actual termination date. And I was in the U.S. Army, and I was a Black Hawk helicopter crew chief. At the time, I believe that was a 67 Tango. They've rebadged it to a 90 series, I believe, at this some. So if you're in the service and that doesn't make any sense, it's because you're younger than me. But anyway, I got out of the military in '03. I then decided that I wanted to be, involved with computers. I'd always loved computers as a kid, and that's kind of, where I wanted to go. So I got an undergrad in information technology out in Colorado at Colorado Technical University. And I finished that degree in 2007. And while I was in, Windows XP came out. So that just, dating. Anyway, and then I started, I guess, my professional career outside of the military after that. So I landed a job at AIG, which is a gargantuan insurance company, if you haven't heard of it. And I started off, like many people in the tech industry, at help desk, right? Answering calls. Hey, have you tried turning it off and on again? All that stuff. That lasted for about 9 years, during which I transitioned from help desk to the software development unit there. They built the software that all the agents sold their insurance through. I eventually became their head automation engineer. So I actually wrote all the code that tested all the developers' code. And so I was well loved by them. Like, hey, I found 50 bugs,
Yeah.
And that lasted for 9 years or so. And then I had kind of gotten bored with that and kind of gotten stale, and I was ready for my next challenge. So during that time, I had gotten married. I'd moved in various places and so on and so forth. My wife and I were ready to have a kid. So I said, hey, let's come back to Nashville. And then once I got her on board with that, I was like, hey, what would be cool is if I didn't work for 2 years and went and got a master's degree at Vanderbilt. So she, bless her heart, was willing to do that with me. And so we took that journey under, and I went to Vanderbilt in 2017 at the ripe young age of 37 and got my MBA. After that, I went back into tech, working at a small company, which I've really enjoyed, and I can get into that more later. But I worked at a company called Mobile Mentor for 4.5 years. And I think at the largest, we were somewhere around 90, 95 employees, something like that. And that's where I kind of really cut my teeth as an executive and learning how to really lead, not as like a squad leader, but as like, an actual executive in the corporate world. And I ended up leaving there after, I think, 4.5 years. And that gets me up to, I guess, about mid 2023. And then I looked around at the landscape and decided I wanted to do this cool fractional thing that I had heard about, which is where that title comes from. But fractional is a fancy word. It just means part-time. But effectively what I do now is I use the experience that I've got, and I go into companies that are, 50, 75 people, something like that. And I just help them clean their stuff up. Right? Go to, hey, what's your HR look like? What's your finance look like? Marketing, sales, all this. Okay, let's mature that a little bit and get you ready to scale up to 300 people or so, something like that. So I've been doing that, and that was about half my time. And the other half, I actually took a shot at becoming a home renovation, founder. And a buddy of mine and I went in and we got a house up in Madison, Tennessee, if you know it, that's North Nashville. Mm-hmm. And we renovated it and then tried to sell it, and it didn't sell. So unfortunately, we just sold it, but we took a bath on that. So unfortunately, that didn't work out. So I'm doing my fractional stuff in 2025, and that'll become more of a full-time thing. Anyway, so that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, appreciate you sharing it. Lots of different areas we can explore. So, one of the a lot of military members are interested in getting into tech. Tech today is a little bit different than it was back when you transitioned out. But I think it's interesting that you sort of charted that path, right? And you stepped into a very basic, right, entry level position, even
Sure.
having a degree, right? I think you said you made the decision to go
Mhm.
back, actually get a 4-year degree.
Mhm.
There's a lot of flashy boot camps and training that's thrown out there to military members. Do you have any insight into that? Have you kind of tracked any of that? Would you recommend any of that? And if not, that's fine. But
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, in Nashville specifically, there is one called the Nashville Software School, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's run by the Nashville Technology Council, the NTC, and I think that's a relatively good one. There are many others that are kind of pay to play. Some of them will let you go for free, and then they kind of take some money once you get placed on the backside. I believe Vanderbilt, I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were offering a boot camp as well. I would say that a boot camp is not going to teach you as much about the fundamentals of computer science as a 4-year degree would, but it's also like 10 months. So
Right.
there's kind of a trade-off to that. The other thing I would tell you is that not everyone is a computer programmer. If you are not engineer minded, I think you will find that it's very hard. So people that are more engineer minded probably excelled in math in school. They may have found English or history boring or more difficult. They might be musical. And if you're not one of those roles, you may still be able to do it, but you may find that that's not really your long-term passion. It's worth mentioning that you don't have to be the computer programmer to work in tech, right? So, for example, you can be the help desk, right? If you go to any tech company and you ask people, where did you start? About 75% are going to tell you we started on the help desk. That's just how things work. But there are other roles, right? So you can be in sales, you can be in marketing, you can be in product. There are many different non-engineering roles in tech companies because they are businesses just like everything else, right? So you don't have to be the computer nerd in order to be in the tech industry, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely have heard National Software School mentioned multiple times on this show. And from what we've learned, and we're looking to actually have them on as a guest, it's probably one of the best that we've seen. There's a lot of different boot camps out there. I think over the last 3 years, there was a huge push. It was kind of like, hey, you can get out of the military and make 6 figures and do all this great stuff. And all you have to do is this, couple month course.
Yeah.
And the reality is that changed very rapidly, especially with AI coming on the scene.
That's right.
And I think it's sort of like the information that's being passed to the military at transition is sort of outdated. Tech moves a lot faster than the information
That's correct.
does, right?
Yeah, I would say prior to COVID, if you had any kind of thing on your resume that said, I've learned something about tech, it's a free hire somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And on the backside of that, especially with the popularity of ChatGPT and other generative predictive text models, that is no longer the case, right?
Yeah.
ChatGPT doesn't replace computer programmers, but it does make them faster. And, corporations are what they are, right? So if they can do more with less, that's what they're going to do, right? That's just how things work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I still think it's really interesting that you went the degree route. Back then, I think that was probably pushed more, right? There wasn't. I don't even know if there were boot camps. They were probably few and far between, right? But the reality was,
there was like ITT, the school or whatever, that was just the tech school. I think they're bankrupt now or something like that.
gotcha.
But yeah, it was basically, if you want to be in tech, go get a 4-year degree.
Yep.
That was
So you've got a 4-year degree, and then then you jump into help desk, right, which is that entry point. And I just call that out because even though that was a handful of years ago, like the reality is you have to make that progression if that's truly what you want to do. And I appreciate you providing clarity around like, hey, if this is you, then yeah, maybe this is the right path. But just because tech is shiny and flashy and there's really good money behind it doesn't mean it's the right path for you. I think that's important for a lot of military members to internalize. But even with that, right, you started at the bottom essentially, right? You went into that entry level and then moved your way up. And I would say, what we find is there's that one person, right? There's that one person that got picked up and got this 6-figure job, and all they did was, go to a 3-month boot camp. And now all of a sudden, like, that's what everyone can do. And fortunately for them, right, that was the case, if it actually is a true story. And unfortunately for everyone else, it sort of becomes a pipe dream. And I think, charting out a path to say, okay, I definitely want to be in tech. But then asking yourself, does it have to be coding, right? Like, what does that mean to you, right? So what is, if I want to be in tech, to your point, there's so many other opportunities, career paths within tech, right?
Right. Tech is an industry, not a job function.
Right. That's right.
And, in Nashville, just, for people that may not be aware, a lot of people know that we're a music city, but really we're a healthcare city, actually. Yeah. Something like 40% of the jobs in Nashville are healthcare related. And we have, I think, something like 90 billion, and maybe more than that, but 90 billion a year flows through us just in healthcare, right? Wow. Now, healthcare has tech too. There's a kind of giant corporation here called HCA, and they have 5 buildings down by the Central Park that are just kind of IT buildings, right? Their budget, I think, is 1.5 billion. That's just IT. So there's some mammoth companies that have tech, build their own apps, do their own stuff, and they're not a traditional tech company. Right? Yep. So there's ways to you may want to not have the horse blinders on. It's got to be Google. It doesn't. There's a whole wide swath of companies in Nashville and the surrounding area that fit the bill.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you clarifying that. And I think kind of jumping into the fractional piece. So we obviously have military members that are at all different stages of transition, all different stages of their career transitioning out. So, you could have a person that's got a handful of years in, that's done sort of one pump, if you will. You've got people that are 20 plus years coming out. There's definitely there's challenges on both sides and everywhere in between, right? I would say for, the 20-year retirees that are getting out, most of them are going to have very extensive leadership experience. Oftentimes there's that sort of disconnect, if you will, right? Where, okay, you're at a very high level within the military. You've been in charge of and managed and led large numbers of people and organizations. But that's often very difficult to translate directly in the civilian sector, right? So oftentimes we see, a lot of people almost have to step backwards. What I think is interesting, and kind of where I want to, get your insight in, is just opening up the possibility of the sort of the fractional opportunity, right? Of saying, is there a way to take that military experience and that leadership and management experience? How could they gain sort of, the industry experience that they would need in the civilian sector? And maybe it's not jumping directly into an executive level role, even though you were at that in the military. There might be other routes, and fractional could be a route. So just your thoughts on that, and person that's sort of sitting in that position and is thinking, okay, what does this next step look like for me?
Sure. Yeah. So for people, so just for anyone who's completed 4 years and getting out, you're not going to be able to do this.
Right.
I don't mean to crush your dreams, but like, oh man, I could do what he did. No, that won't work. Yeah. For my 20-year people and beyond, you at minimum will need to have completed a bachelor's degree, which you should have during that because of the requirements for NCOs as well as officers, so on and so forth. That's bare minimum. What I would tell you tactically is to take and build a resume and then show it to people that are not in the military. Several, not just your family that might know, but go find somebody on LinkedIn, get a coffee shop in the morning in Nashville somewhere. Go get some people that don't know military and have them read your resume. And every time they go, "What's this?" you're being too jargony, right? And that's a real trick. And to be able to still, I guess, speak to the things that you've done, but in a way that it answers so what from a civilian's point of view, and not, oh, I get that you were the top three head blah, blah. You can't, they don't get it, right? So so that's one, just tactically. From a more, I guess, strategic point of view, and how do you land that first placement, you're going to need to look for people that, I guess, have been in the military and that are in high positions in the company now, or a company that you want, right? So that's really what I would say is the trick there, is you have to network and find those people, right? And there is a large community of veterans here in Nashville, right? So if you can get plugged in with them, like, for example, at the NTC, ask around, hey, who's a veteran? Those are the people that are going to be your champions, and they're going to help open doors for you in a way that applying through a job is not going to do, right? I would say it's particular if you're interested in fractional, you will not have success if the only thing you do is apply. Right. One, if you actually go and look on, Indeed.com or LinkedIn, you won't see fractional roles. You might, maybe 5 in the whole US, right? And that'll usually be for a CFO. Right? Yeah. And then most of those are looking for you to have been a CFO for 10 to 15 years. Right. So it's kind of tricky coming out of the military. What you need to do is you need to find people at small to medium businesses. So it's in corporate world, that's SMB. That's maybe 50 to 200 people, sometimes a little bigger than that. And you're looking for people in the leadership and C-suite that have a military history, right? LinkedIn's your best tool for that. You can look through that. The other thing is to use your own network. So you may have known people that have transitioned 3 or 4 years before you. They are very good people to talk to. How did they do it? What problems did they have? What success did they have? Pick their brain, ask them questions, right? It's through talking and networking with real humans that you will be able to find success. And I guess as far as fractional versus full-time, it's really just your appetite for how many hours a week you want to work, right? If you're looking for true fractional work and you only want to work a couple of days a week, look for, those kind of 50 to 75 people companies, right? Those are going to be the ones that they may need some help with somebody just to keep them corralled and help them march together in alignment. And military people are exceptionally good at that. Right. And then, just be prepared for the shock of moving into the civilian world as well. I don't want to call people babies, right? That's not really what I mean by that. But things are much softer in the civilian world than they are in the military, right? There is a certain expectation of soldiers and ability to handle criticism in a way that some people do not have in the civilian world yet, especially the young, right? They come in and it's just part of the generational thing. I don't mean to sound like a boomer or anything like that, but it is an adjustment, right? And you'll have to learn how to lead with empathy and soft touch, right? It's those intrinsic skills that you have somewhat developed, but you'll have to continue to work on that.
Yeah. Would you recommend, from a fractional standpoint, would you recommend somebody that has that leadership experience first trying to go into, maybe a management type role within an organization to really just get a lay of the land, right? To understand, okay, number one, what's it like to work in the civilian sector? Number two, like, how are these companies established, right? Because, you always use you always hear executives say, right, like, okay, you want me to hire you in as a VP, right? Would you hire me in as an XO of your unit, and put me in charge of something that I have no idea what I'm doing, even though I'm the CEO of a company, right? And I think that's a viable sort of way for executives and leaders to look at that. So somebody that is coming out with that leadership, would it make sense to sort of first jump into getting that experience, understanding what this looks like, how it operates, before they try and jump into maybe that fractional or that more executive type position?
Sure. Yeah. The bad news is, or the reality is, there is, there is a set of knowledge that you need to know about how business operates, right? You need to understand the real ins and outs of what is marketing, what does good marketing versus bad look like, right? Do you understand how Google Ads works and how you track revenue spent to dollars generated? Do you understand, supply chain? Do you understand, how money turns and work in progress? And so there's actually a real skill set to administering a business, in the same way that there is a skill set to being a crew chief, or being the officer of a battalion. Right? There is some knowledge there that even if you are a very strong leader, you are going to be missing, right? And there's unfortunately no real shortcut to that. What I would say is that military people are wizards at ops. They just, it's just kind of part of being that. And you can kind of help make up for some of that experience slack by doing a few simple things. So one is you can go get a Lean Six Sigma certification. The very foundational version of that is a yellow belt. And then there's one that's a little bit harder. It's called a green belt. Both of those will really help you set yourself apart. But that's if you really want to be in kind of either manufacturing or a more straight ops role. If you want to be in, marketing or sales, or be a leader in a particular function, you're going to need to get some knowledge and be able to demonstrate competency to leaders, particularly civilians, right? Because they're going to be nervous. Well, you haven't done this before. That sets off my risk, radar. And now I'm like, oh, I don't know. Right. And in today's job market, and generally always, you will be competing against potentially hundreds or even thousands of candidates. That's just life. Right. I will tell you that I know Amazon for sure loves military guys in their warehouses. So to run a warehouse, that may sound horrible to some people, but it may not to others. Right. And it can be, I had a bunch of guys that were in my Vanderbilt MBA program. They went and did that and they love it. Right. And so, there are roles like that. There's roles at Walmart. There's roles at all kinds of companies that have a large workforce of, let's call them, younger or less professional, type of roles. There's also a lot of trade jobs. So in Nashville, Lee Company, Hoffman Brothers, there's quite a few others that are either in the, plumbing, electrical, or something like that. And those guys do really well under a military leader, right? They just naturally, it just works, right? It's kind of the same profile of guys that you have enlisted in the military. So that's good. And then in tech itself, who would be kind of, what's their name? The big tech company here that does the phone insurance, or used to do the phone insurance, Assurion. They're pretty nice to military guys as well, from my understanding. So there's a lot of different options there, but you're gonna have to be able to translate how your leadership skills will apply in a role, and you need to be able to sell that to people. And then you actually need to do whatever you can to really learn kind of about how businesses run. Right. And I recommend doing that through either talking to people is probably your best bet. You can do some YouTube videos on that. You can do a short, if you already have a bachelor's, you can do a short executive MBA program. Those Vanderbilt offers one, right? So it's designed for nights and weekends, so you can work while you do it. And just as a final tip to anyone, if you do want to take that track, remember that your military service carries weight like nothing else, right? Don't sell yourself short. If you want to apply to the top 10 MBA programs in the US, you go ahead and do it. And I bet you'll get accepted, right? At Vanderbilt, we took military all day long, right? Now, you had to meet a certain threshold, but it was considerably below what they would take for people who had not served, because they know that a military leader is a real bona fide, tested, proven leader.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think some of that may get lost in the resume, right? Crafting, if you will, where it's okay, let me sort of downplay all the military side of it, but then do you lose the capability of actually selling yourself in a way that is clear enough to that, civilian, that individual sitting across the table that doesn't have that experience. So I think that's huge, right? Don't downplay it. As in the fractional world, maybe a military member that's transitioning out right now kind of looks at that as like step number 2 or step number 3. But I mean, from your standpoint, what does that provide you, right? So being a fractional COO versus being a full-time COO, what are the similarities, the differences? What's the value that you find in that?
Sure. Yeah. For me, it allowed me to take a shot at starting my own business, right? And that was really the reason that I did it. I'm not opposed to full-time work versus part-time. I'm looking at both now. I just did a year with a client called Buffalo River Trust, and we worked on a lot of their basic, functions, all the stuff, and kind of matured it. And then I gave them a high five, and off they go. And so now I'm looking for my next role. The freedom that fractional provides for me, I guess, is that I can kind of set my own schedule, right? So I'm the master of that. It also gives me the freedom to look for clients that I really believe I can help and make a difference with. For the guys that have done 20 years in the military, you're probably going to have a bit of an identity crisis in the same way that a football player who retires is like, whoa, shit, now what? Right? Like, oh no. Yeah. And that's normal, right? It takes a while to figure that out. And the freedom of that is it allows you to find fulfillment by actually working with somebody who needs the capabilities and the skill sets that you naturally have, right? I can't help every company, and I know that. And that's okay. I'm not trying to help every company. I'm trying to find, in my case, this is Shane speaking, I like small businesses. I don't like businesses that are above about 250 people. It gets too tapey. There's interdepartmental conflicts, right? We got power struggles and politics. And I especially don't like AIG scale companies, right? Like you couldn't pay me to go work for one of them. Again, I don't want to be a cog in the machine. Yeah. Some people may like that kind of rigid structure and tape and process, especially if you're at the top of it. Absolutely. But me, I couldn't do it, even if, all the budget in the world, I just couldn't do it. So I look for small companies, right? That's the kind of the long and short of that. And when I do, I look for companies that generally have been started by a visionary who, they're just really gung-ho on this idea, and they've taken it and they've succeeded. And now all of a sudden, everything that used to work goes, right? And because of my natural ability to kind of galvanize people and push them forward in the same direction, and the wisdom of real life plus the formal education I've got, I'm able to improve things a lot for them, and that helps them. Right? Hopefully, at least some of you that are transitioning can learn kind of what your natural skill sets are, what your values are, and try to find organizations where they need that. And if you do, man, going to work is the best thing in the world, right? I mean, that's not to say it's not super happy fun time, right? Like, sure. It's still work, but it can be really rewarding when you spend 6 months to a year working on some major initiative and it lands and it hits and everybody's excited and the business is winning and we're growing. That's really fulfilling, right? And that's, if I could impart anything on you, even for the youngins that have only done 4 years, it's try to learn enough about yourself that you know what's going to make you happy and bring you fulfillment in life. Because if you can work in a role that does that for you, it's going to make your life better. I guess the last thing about fractional that's worth mentioning is that you have to kind of find your own people. So if you just want a salary and you don't want to do that, I'd highly recommend looking at full-time. If you love talking to people and not having a guaranteed salary and having to do all of that, then fractional might be for you. I'm able to charge more as a fractional than I would as a full-time role. So just there is that. That's kind of the trade-off, right? So when a company needs somebody, if they need, somebody in a part-time manner to help them out for a limited time, there's a premium to that, right? And that allows me to work 4 days a week for what the same amount or more sometimes than I would get working full time at one place. My puppy is really excited.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think, from the fractional standpoint, these are just so kind of the listeners understand, like a lot of these companies, right? When you're talking 50 to 200 people, I think the underlying assumption is that just like in the military, where there's this leadership structure in place, right? And every unit has a leadership structure that then goes up. I think what's different and what may not be apparent to a lot of military members is that smaller companies that sure you might have 50 people, but you may not actually have that top level structure in place, right? Because for however long you've been in business, you've been generating your product, your service, selling that, getting to the point where you're at. And I think sometimes that can, right, you just assume, well, in the military there's always, right,
That's right.
structure. How would a company that has 100 employees need a fractional anything, right? And the reality is, that's how companies grow, right? Is that they may not have that leadership in place, and most often don't because they can't afford it. They don't need it at the time. And I think to your point earlier, finding companies that are owned and led by, former not former, but veterans, that understand the value that you bring when they're at their point in their own journey of saying, okay, I now need to bring in leadership. I now need to establish that in order to take my company from 50 or 100 to 200, 300, right? That's where that awareness comes in. And, I appreciate you sharing that because I think that's something that's very much overlooked. It's just assumed that, if you're not just a really tiny company, that you've got sort of this big, huge leadership management structure in place. And the reality is a lot of companies don't. And while
for sure. It's usually organic growth in most businesses. And the reality with most businesses is, as long as you have a good product and so on and so forth, right? I mean, you can just have a crap business, but if you have something and you're onto it, you generally will grow to the point that everything breaks, and that's where you plateau, and then you go. So don't assume that there is order and that everything is great. I mean, no, it'll be the exact opposite. You'll come in and be like, what are we doing here? Like, hey, how do you guys do your standard this? What's that? Right? How do you hire people? We don't know. That's very common. Even in businesses that are making $10 and $20 million a year, there is stuff, particularly the things that are not customer facing, right? Usually the stuff that we present to customers is pretty locked in, right? But if you get behind that and you look at, well, what are the tools that we use inside and how are those managed and how do we handle our own people and blah, blah, it's a dumpster fire. And that's kind of the standard, right? And the reality is you don't need to be good to grow. You just need to be a little less of a dumpster fire than your competitor. That's it. Right. And so you're not playing against common sense or right. You're playing against your competitors. That's the real, I guess, eye opener that I saw. And one of the reasons I know I can help people. Right? Hey, we can fix that up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Well, let's shift to Nashville. So you're a Nashville native. You moved back there. One of the things we like to share with the military community is just why is Nashville a great place to live and work? And if you could highlight on some of your thoughts there, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Nashville is a great place to live and a great place to work. Up until 5 years ago, it was also a very cheap place to buy a house. That ship has sailed. I got some bad news for the people transitioning now. I think houses in Clarksville are still somewhat cheap if you're coming out of Campbell, but in town, not so much anymore. Nashville has a booming economy. At one point, I think we had more sky cranes from big buildings being put up than any other city in America. That was like one of many things. We have for more than a decade had somewhere on the order of 70 to 100 people a day moving to the city. We have really, really, really grown, which is good. At the state level, we don't have an income tax. Big fan of that. If you live in Nashville itself, we don't have an income tax, and our property taxes are generally supported by the tourism that comes here, right? So you probably heard about Broadway. If not, you will. If you've been to Campbell, I'm sure you've been down there a few times. And those 250,000 or so people that come every weekend, they spend a lot of money, and Nashville, properly taxes them for that privilege. And so that keeps our taxes low, which is great. As far as jobs, we have a really robust economy, right? As I said earlier, the backbone of our economy here is healthcare, and healthcare is something like, I don't know, 5 trillion, 6 trillion. It keeps going up, but somewhere on the order of that as a complete industry, right? There is a ton of healthcare here. And the neat thing about healthcare is it is entirely recession proof. It does not change, right? There's no days off in healthcare. People get sick, people die, people have babies. It don't matter, right? It's a 24-hour cycle, right? My wife is a doctor, so I'm quite, I get to watch that from a pretty close view. Outside of that, I think Nashville is a fun city to live in. We have 2 lakes in the city that are really great recreational lakes. You can take a boat out on them, swim in them, jump in them, cliff jump if that's what you're into. It may not be for everybody, but
That's awesome.
yeah. And then we have the Cumberland River that runs through town, and I wouldn't recommend swimming downtown, but if you go west of the city, you actually can. It's clean enough that you can do that there. There's also a lot of rivers for the outdoorsy type, so you can kayak and canoe in the Harpeth River or one of many others. There's also a bajillion really nice parks and trails around here, so if that's what you like to do, that's great. And if you're more of a goof off indoor type of thing, obviously we have a really great central entertainment district downtown, and a lot of if you like, I don't know, I like drinking when I got out of the military. I probably shouldn't promote it too much, but we have a really vibrant craft beer scene as well. We have a ton of local breweries that are fantastic. Shout out to Tailgate and Wes, who has really done well. He's blown up, and many others. Yazoo, anyway, the list is long. Google it. As far as the professional world, we have a bunch of colleges around here that support us. So we've got 2 HSBCs, or historically HBSC, historically black. Anyway, we have 2 of those. TSU being the bigger of the 2. We have MTSU, which I think is the largest by population, the largest school in the state. Now it's quite huge. So if you're looking for a 4-year degree, Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, great pick. We have Lipscomb downtown. We have Vanderbilt downtown. We have Belmont downtown. All 3 of those are fantastic schools. There's Trevecca. There's many. So it's a great place to get an education if that's what you want to do coming out of the military, particularly for your 4-year guys that may be getting out. You're still young. Go get a degree. It'll help you out, right? What else would be good to know about Nashville? I don't know, man. So many things, but it's a city that is winning. We're kicking the snot out of a lot of places, and because of that growth, it means opportunities, right? If you move to a place that unfortunately is cutting down and losing people and so on and so forth, you're not going to have the same opportunity that you would here. I guess our weather's pretty good. Not today. For those that may be recording, we're getting snow flurries a day. The whole coast is getting bombed. But we have all 4 seasons. So if you like that, we're here. Our winters are mild by northern standards and short by northern standards. So you can usually be back into shorts by the end of March, which is great because I love being outdoors. But anyway, I don't know. That's I'm blabbering, but that's Nashville. I love it. I'm from here. I've lived all over the planet, and I keep coming home because it's the city for me for sure.
No, that's awesome, and we constantly get just positive feedback on the location, even with the growth. It seems that the growth, yes, it's brought sort of new people, different backgrounds, different experiences, but the reality is it's all it's sort of growing together and staying vibrant. So that's pretty cool. Well, Shane, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on here, share your story, help providing all the insight that you did for the military members that are out there that are approaching that transition point, or maybe they've transitioned and they're still trying to find their way. So really appreciate you being on the show, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find my little bald head on that. And if you want to chat, reach out. I'll say hi. That's okay. I'm here. Happy to chat.
No, I appreciate that, and definitely want to end on kind of the reoccurring theme that we're always sharing, which is you have to network, right? Don't rely on that apply button.
That's the reality, right? Network
right.
matters more than anything, man. For you introverts, I know that's tough, but you just have to meet people and talk to them and share experiences with them, and that's going to make all the world of a difference for you.
Awesome. Well, Shane, thanks again, and appreciate you being here.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Sean.